to my YouTube channel. My name is Denise. Long time no see. I am so happy to be back here with you all, and I hope that you trust that if I come back to YouTube, it's because there's a really important transmission to be distributed. I am here once again, just like every other time, on assignment from the Akashic Records to deliver to you some potentially life altering information. So, I want to invite you to take a couple breaths and try to just listen to this information and see how it resonates for you, see if it makes sense to you, and just try to listen with an open mind. Okay? While you center yourself, I am going to introduce myself to those who don't know me and are not familiar with my work. My name is Denise. I am an Akashic Records practitioner and Akashic Records trainer. I teach people to access and channel the wisdom of the Akashic Records at various levels, beginning with beginners all the way through to professional practitioners of the Akashic Records. I also am the owner of School for the Mercurious, which is an online mystery school where we discuss energetic studies, spiritual technologies, as well as self-development topics. I channel a weekly message about the energies of the week for subscribers, and it's overall a really good time. So if you're interested, I will drop links to those areas below, as well as to my menu if you feel called to discuss this with me, and if you feel called to work and connect with me in one way, shape, or form. Perfect. Now we can go ahead and really get started on what I came here to discuss. So the topic of interest is interdimensional collapse and integration, which sounds very lofty, and it kind of is. So I'm going to do my best to break this down as best as I can. I first ran into this technology and had firsthand experience with it in the spring of 2019. I was going through emotional hardship, we'll call it, and I ended up at the beach giving myself a good old-fashioned cry. I opened the Akashic Records with the intention to just ask for some support, but I got a lot more than that, way more than what I bargained for. They offered to tell me a story about Atlantis. They asked me, do you want to know about Atlantis? And I was like, yes, tell me, I want a story. So the records told me a story about Atlantis, the continent that once existed on Earth. They told me the location of where it was. They told me how society was organized. They told me about some of their technology, and they told me about who I was. They told me about who I was and what I did in that lifetime and the things I had been through. Who I was, what my job was, who my family was, etc., etc. As they were telling me this, I became aware. Something from a long time ago came into awareness, which was a recurring nightmare I had as a child, where my bedroom was in a transparent dome in a house underwater. Now, I don't know if Atlantis meaning was like a mermaid society. I don't know if that's true. I'm not saying it's not true. I'm just saying from what the records told me, it was a human continent that had the technology to sustain life above water and underneath it. So in my room, I remember the dome was transparent, so I could watch marine life happening all around me, and I remember really liking it. I don't think the rest of my house was transparent, but a large chunk of it was underwater, and my room happened to be in the transparent portion of the house. I remember in that dream, a very large shark would loom in the distance, and I would sit up in my bed and I would start freaking out, calling to mom and dad because the shark was so big that it started attacking the dome and it started shattering it. And I would always wake up when it got really violent. Um, I realized through the records telling me about that Atlantean lifetime and who I was, I realized that I, even as a child in this lifetime, was experiencing and processing a really traumatic event in human history, which was the fall of Atlantis. And the shark, that's what it was representing in my dream. It was the fall of Atlantis. Um, and it was the shadow of greed, which caused Atlantis to fall. So this whole time, I'm thinking I'm just hearing a story about a past life, which, you know, sounds crazy to some people, but to me at this point, sounded completely logical. I was like, wow. And I started recognizing how a lot of those patterns were still relevant and still playing out in my real life, in my Denise life. In that lifetime, I had lost my father abruptly during the conflicts of Atlantis. In this lifetime, I grew up with the perpetual fear that my father was going to be taken away from us because he was undocumented. And this fear was enough to send me to therapy at a really young age because I would wake up screaming from these nightmares. At least I'm told because I don't remember them. Um, and my family, losing Atlantis abruptly, losing my home, my nationality, I guess. I don't know, my home. I lost my home. Um, that happened in this lifetime. During the housing crisis of the 2000s, my parents lost our home, so we were homeless for a little while. And I continued experiencing patterns of home insecurity throughout my college years. For some reason, I just couldn't be in one place. Something always fell through. So I realized that those patterns that life, that person in Atlantis lived out were still directly affecting my life, me as Denise. So the records threw a wrench in the way I perceive that reality. They said that all of time happens simultaneously. It's not linear the way we think it is, and it's not separate the way we think it is. So what I was hearing as a story of a past life is actually experiences that I am currently having somewhere else on the time-space continuum, beyond my perceived reality. For all I knew, the beach I was sitting there crying in, listening to this story, was probably the beach where I lost my father or something. I don't know. But the point being, I realized that I was in two places at once. So I asked, if I send a message to this person, they told me her name. I said, if I send a message to her, will she hear me? And can I hear her back if she sends me one? And the record said, yes, you can do that. So I did, and I heard back almost immediately. And then I began contacting that person, not very often, I'll admit, but once or twice, mostly because I thought I was making it all up. So once or twice, I was able to reach her in meditative states and, just kind of chat and be like, wow, isn't it crazy that we're the same person? Like, that's so weird to me. Now, I became aware that Atlanteans lived a really, really long time. And that person that I was in Atlantis was getting pretty up there in age, even for her race of humanoids. So the records presented an invitation. They said, why don't you allow her consciousness, to merge with your consciousness and occupy one human body at a time? Which means if I said yes, she would give up her physical form. So her physical form would die wherever she was on the time-space continuum. And her consciousness, her memories, her experiences would merge into my body and we would become one person. I was very apprehensive about it because I didn't want her to die. I liked talking to her, but she assured me that she had been training for this for a long time, and she had been training me even without me knowing it. And I trust the Akashic records, so I said, yes, do the integration, perform that. I don't know how, but do it while I'm asleep. I don't know why. I didn't want it to hurt or something. And I was like, just do it when I'm asleep. And they said, okay. Um, so they did it. We set a date, we set a time, and it happened. For the first 2 weeks, it was a little clumsy. I remember very obviously feeling weird in my own life. Like I didn't own it. So it was like I was a guest in my own body. It was really interesting. Um, when I integrated, let's call her version 2. When I integrated version 2 of myself, the Atlantean life, I noticed she made changes to my diet right away. I stopped eating meat. I stopped smoking ganja. I stopped drinking alcohol. And several emotional patterns happened, and I noticed physical changes. My body changed too. I lost weight like crazy. I dropped weight like a rock. My tone of voice audibly changed, as well as other things. But I would say those were the most tangible changes that could be witnessed by other people and were. Now, after those first 2 weeks, I couldn't hear her in my head anymore. I couldn't. During the initial first 2 weeks of the integration, I could hear her commenting on things, and I could hear her making observations as I lived my life with her along as she felt necessary. But after about 2 weeks, I lost her completely. We really had become one person. And I felt so normal that I honestly thought that I made it all up. I thought that I was crazy. I thought that I just imagined and just I had a vivid imagination. I don't know. The only real proof and validation I had that it did happen was the changes that stayed with me. The body changes, the diet changes, and how different my intuitive experiences were. My understanding of technology, of spiritual technology and consciousness skyrocketed to a different level that I wouldn't have been able to reach otherwise. But it was because her experiences became my own that I retained her memory. I retained her training. I retained her innate knowledge of her society and the people that she loved. Like they were all there. And that was the only way that I knew that all of this was still real, because I still felt that. So there you go. That was the first time I ever experienced that technology. Which brings me to explaining what interdimensional collapse and integration really is. So what it is, I have some visuals to help. I think we'll start there. This is basically the equivalent of a child drawing you a stick figure, so please celebrate it because I'm really proud of myself. So here is a pretty accurate picture, I think, of how human beings experience consciousness as of right now. That's me. Here are all the other points in history and the time-space continuum where I have somehow been alive. And let's say that this is my highest self. My highest self defined as being the soul aspects of me. So me at a soul level that has gotten the closest to returning to the formless, raw, pure energy that some people call spirit, source, God, universal mind, that space, that raw form of energy that has no data, no interpretation. It just exists. It has no purpose. It just is there. So let's identify the 3 parts one more time. Source energy, the version of you that exists that is the closest to embodying source energy in physical form. all of the different points of the universe that you've ever been alive in, and you right now. Right now, human beings think that all of this is happening separate from them, meaning we don't take ownership of it. We say, oh, a past life, so that's not me anymore. Or we say, my highest self. Now, in some spiritual circles, there exist people who have a strong conceptual understanding that no human being is separate from another. Black is not separate from white. It is different, but it is never ever separate. We are all inherently connected, and we are connected through the ether, the divine impulse which animates all of life, the divine impulse that says speak, the divine impulse that says I am, and becomes aware of itself. Very much like Star Wars, the force that connects us all. Okay, very that. So this is where human beings are currently experiencing consciousness. Everything is separate from us. You're different. I'm not like you. We completely ignore that we all share the divine impulse to begin with, and we are all animated by the same source energy. It is formless, meaning it has no real purpose, it just is. So that's the first visual. Here's the second visual. The time-space continuum isn't linear and horizontal the way most of us subconsciously think that it is. It's actually like a stack of paper stacked on a spindle. Now, this spindle represents that divine impulse, the ether, the place inside of us where we are all knowing and we are everywhere at one time, the omnipresence, again, the universal mind. Now, the stacks of papers represent different dimensional realities. So let's say you were, somewhere here in the past. Let's say you're somewhere here in the present, but you're also alive here and here and here and here and here and here and here, because all of this is existing at once. Okay? All of time is happening simultaneously. I saw a description of time in a Conversations with God book. I think it was called At Home with God by Neil Donald Walsh, which described time as being like an epic library. Hi, hello, Akashic Records reference. But no, really, like being an epic library. And let's say you walk into time and you're looking for a specific title of a book. You're looking for a book. You walk into the library of time and you are temporarily distracted by the decorations, by the amount of books that there are, by the beautiful lamp in the corner, by the sofa that you have the option to sit on. It's all so glamorous and beautiful, and the tile on the floor, you're like, wow, this is beautiful. And then you look up and you find the book that you came here for. That book existed the whole time, but you only became aware of it when you remembered that you were looking for it to begin with. So that's pretty much how it goes. All of this is existing and just essentially waiting for you to become aware of the different points of consciousness where you are. So that's pretty much how it is. All of that library is existing at once. That book just didn't appear when you were looking for it. It was already there. But you perceived it when you wanted to, when you were done appreciating everything else that you were looking at. It's very simultaneous to life experiences. So these dimensional realities, you are experiencing an aspect of yourself. Let's say in this lifetime, you wanted to learn forgiveness. And in this lifetime over here, you wanted to learn love. And over here, you wanted to learn pain, whatever. All of this is happening continuously. It's happening all at once at different dimensional levels. That's why in ancient cultures, solstices and equinoxes are very powerful times, because they represent when the time-space continuum on Earth is in perfect balance, which means it's a rare moment on the spindle instead of anywhere else on the dimensional realities. So timeline integration is basically changing the way we experience consciousness by inviting other aspects of ourselves to occupy one anchor point of consciousness, usually the strongest one. For most of us, the strongest point of consciousness is the life we are currently living right now on Earth. That's why you're receiving this information. Why? Because Earth is objectively a really, really hard and challenging place to be. You are severely limited. You are exposed to weather patterns. You are exposed to hunter versus prey, predator versus prey. You are subject to abuse. You are subject to a lot, okay? Having a dense physical form and having multiple races of humans living in one space is pretty much unheard of anywhere else in the universe. So just think about that for a second. So what happens in this technology, this interdimensional collapse and integration, is you stop seeing yourself as separate and you start inviting yourself. You start inviting all aspects of yourself to integrate into one physical form, one anchor point on the time-space continuum, the one strongest, essentially. Now, this doesn't mean strongest physically, but in a way it does. It means strongest mentally, emotionally, the one who has the most potential to become God in human form, essentially. So as you begin to work through these karmic patterns, because again, you are accepting not just the blessings that come with your previous incarnations, you are also accepting their emotional experiences as your responsibility. As you are doing that, what happens is that the highest aspects of yourself used to be here start becoming more accessible to you simultaneously. As you collapse lower timelines by resolving them, and I'll get more into that process a little later, then higher versions of you who have gotten closer to reaching source energy also become embodied, because now you have the room for it. Your vibration allows for different movements like that. Now, eventually, through continuous use of this technology, your highest self and your embodied self, the version of you that exists right now, become one thing. So that means your soul at the highest level, at the level that was the closest to embodying source energy, is living through you right now. So your body, the thoughts that your body has, the emotional experiences that your body has, your ego, and your soul are all working in the same direction in the same body. It's a really high level of cohesion. When that happens, that leaves one road, and that is back to source, which in our human terms, we consider ascended mastery. Now, ascended mastery is a person who lives in a godly fashion. Now, this has nothing to do with morals. I'm speaking from a strictly technological standpoint, which means you live in a godly fashion, which means you are omnipresent, you are all-knowing, you are able to retain down to the last detail all of the memories and all of the aspects and data that you collected when you were down here and when you were on all aspects of universe, because now you live on the spindle. Ascended mastery is a person who can embody their soul in their current physical form, and they live here on the spindle, which means you can drop into any dimensional reality and travel through all of the time-space continuum from right behind your eyelids, or from just commanding those memories to come into awareness, like you're watching your own movie. So ascended mastery is essentially the process of God in human form. So you have a physical body, but you're not trapped by it. You can leave whenever you want to and return whenever you want to. Very Jesus, Son of God energy here. But the same is true of many prophets. The same was true of Enoch. The same is true of the Buddha, Kuan Yin, and all the ascended masters, Horus, Isis. But see, that requires that all of your energy be in one place. Otherwise, you do not have the spiritual stamina and strength, the energy to be able to transcend time and space like that. So, ascended mastery is essentially immortality. But immortality does not mean you stay alive forever in the same body, because if that were true, then your very own body would become a prison for you. Instead, what it means is that you are now free from the time-space continuum. You have reached a point where you can act as God. You have all of the qualities of God, the unconditional love, the omnipresence, being everywhere all at once in a human form. Which means if you leave and you die in physical form and you go back to the formlessness and then you change your mind and you decide to come back, you are born into a physical form of your choice while retaining all memories of all the lives you've ever had. So that is the key to immortality, and that's the real ascended mastery, is that you are at a level of consciousness where you retain all memories relevant to your lived experiences. And you are free from the matrix, essentially. The next time you die and you come back to life, you decide to be reborn, you don't go through the amnesia. You remember that the connection to God exists. You remember your experiences that led you to mastery. You remember everything. So your physical form, you're no longer trapped in it, because you're just no longer trapped in it. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but so that's what it is. Essentially, what I did was I invited an aspect of myself to occupy one body. And in her physical form, she disappeared. She died. In my physical form, she completely enhanced my ability to channel, my ability to heal, my ability to predict, to divinate, to really connect with a person. I completely changed. But at the same time, I was overcome with her challenges, losing my home. That was really, really triggering. And I experienced it again that year. I had to move back home with my parents, and that was not my ideal situation, but I had to. And I had to relive that experience of not having a home to myself. And then override her data with the data I had about life. So I'm going to jump into that in just a second. What happens is at a level of consciousness, let me go back to my illustration. What happens when you first come into physical form is pretty much everybody starts with an A. The first time you come into a physical form, most of us are pretty freaking ascended. We can't do so much damage that we fall all the way to earth right away. It takes a long time to get there. And by the time you get here, you're considered like, this is like your PhD life. This is like your thesis statement. This is where you're going to go ham. This is where you're going to go off and show off everything you've ever known about yourself. Right? I'm trying to find the best way to explain this without making it too complicated or this video too long. But essentially, what happens is your highest self, the first time you take a physical form, you're pretty much born into a dimensional space where it's very high vibrational. It's not like Earth. Earth is really not that old, but life is eternal. So think of how many incarnations you've had before Earth was even a thing. You know what I mean? So your highest self, as we defined, is basically the point of consciousness where you were the closest to acting, to embodying God in human form. So, how this technology works is, in order for you to get back to that person, in order for you to embody that person, you have to first become aware and actively invite the responsibility of collapsing all fragmented timelines. So, right now, all we can really do until we accept that as true is become manipulators of reality. What that means is all we can do is manipulate our lives and ourselves in a certain way to make our lived experiences a little easier. We have no control about the life experiences that we're dealt with, that we're born into. All we can do is manipulate ourselves and our environments and our behaviors in a way that makes us feel a little safer, maybe even joyous to be here. But we cannot become creators, which is what the Godhead is, the universal mind. That's what it does. It creates, it's a creative impulse. In order for us to become creators of reality in that way, in that really masterful way, such as the prophets of old, the ascended masters that are well documented on this earth, we have to first become responsible and collapse all points of the time-space continuum where our consciousness is still feeding energy into. Okay? So when you were this high and you decided to come to Earth, what happened was that at a soul level, you chose to rebuild. You wanted to prove that you are who you conceptualize yourself to be. So at a really high level, let's say you decided that you were generous. But how do you know that you're generous when you're formless, when you're a raw form of energy, or when you're in a physical body, but at a really, really high degree? Your peers don't need anything from you. You've never given something to someone else. You've never had to be generous. So how do you know that you actually are? You haven't experienced being generous. So you go somewhere, some other place on the time-space continuum where greed exists, so that you can experience greed, because that's a shadow. So that's a relevant pattern. So you experience greed, you experience generosity, you experience being a little too generous, giving a little too much, coming back into balance, etc., etc. You experience every geometric pattern that exists until you form a sphere around generosity. And you say, here's my sphere of generosity. I have learned and experienced every single possibility of generosity. I've ascended. I've mastered generosity. All aspects of it. Good, bad. No, I don't subscribe to that. I don't think that exists, but I've experienced all sides of it. Here it is. Here's my little sphere. So in order for you to actually be able to reach that sphere, you have to become responsible for your lowest aspects. You have to reconcile the pain body, the fragmented information. So here's what happens. When you come into form, you don't lose the connection to God. You lose the awareness that you have one to begin with. So your lowest aspects, your lowest aspects are the aspects of yourself that were created, that were born, as a response to feeling pain for the first time. Think of it like this. You're an all-knowing, omnipresent being. You're formless. You come into form, okay? And suddenly you are not making decisions from the same data pool that you had before. Because now you forgot your connection to God. You forgot your connection to the universal mind. You forgot that that exists. So you don't have the same data available to draw conclusions about life from. You can't say, oh God, you're so funny making this inconvenient for me so I can grow. Haha, okay, all right, I'll show you I can grow. You don't have that understanding of life anymore. You have amnesia, and that's exactly what your soul wants. Your soul wants to prove that it is and can experience what it conceptualizes itself to be. Look at this light just hitting me from the window. Woo! Anyway, so it is only through amnesia that we can really begin to reconstruct our consciousness. Now, that gets messed up a little bit when all of a sudden we're left alone, or we think that we are. The only way we have to draw conclusions about life and what it is and our purpose for being here is through the body. So we're not coming from an omnipresent, I know everything, I'm in all places at once energy. Now we're severely limited. And the only way we can come to conclusions about life is through experiencing life. So if you experience pain, it becomes very easy to say, oh my God, being alive is painful. And as soon as you accept pain as an inherent part of the life experience, not just part of that lifetime, you believe life itself to be inherently painful because you experienced pain in a way other than what you were emotionally prepared to cope with. That's trauma. You are traumatized now. What happens is all other aspects of yourself that are created after that are created as a result of that original conclusion you came to from a limited pool of data. That conclusion didn't come from here. You didn't have access to that data anymore. You came to that conclusion because you experienced pain while alive in a physical body and you were not emotionally equipped to handle it. So, or spiritually for that matter. So you began to believe being alive is painful because this, and this. So every other point of consciousness, every time you've come back to life in a different time or a different point in the time-space continuum has that conclusion as the basis. So that was why I was experiencing all of version 2's karmic patterns. I was literally still experiencing something that had happened eons ago, way beyond my perceived reality, because it was so traumatic that my consciousness at some point on the time-space continuum just kept feeding energy to the same thing on a loop, on a loop, on a loop, because it couldn't reconcile it. It couldn't cope. It couldn't find a solution. It couldn't make its way back to the higher perception, the all-knowingness, and say, oh, I remember why I wanted this experience. Okay, I can do this. So what happens is with this timeline weaving, when you invite other points of the time-space continuum to embody one thing, what happens is as you take responsibility for those patterns, you begin overriding those conclusions because now you have a more extensive set of data. The first time you came to life on Earth, you didn't know anything, baby. You were really vulnerable. And as a result, you probably got traumatized. Which brings me to this chart. It is essentially the chart that delineates our lowest aspects all the way to ascended mastery. So your lowest aspects are more likely than not going to be points on the time-space continuum in which you were alive in physical form, and it's more likely than not going to be on Earth because Earth is just a hard knock place to be in general. So what happens is, let's say this is the anchor point. This is you right now. This is the version of you right now that's alive. A lot of your lived experiences are coming as a result of conclusions that were made back here. So unworthiness, resistance to power, being afraid of the dark. I don't know. A lot of those patterns are still coming as a result of this, because once you made a conclusion about life from a limited pool of data, from the data that you could only experience through your body, all other points on the time-space continuum carry that vibration. They carry that encrypted code. So what happens when you invite this lowest aspect of you, the first time you ever felt pain and trauma, to occupy your physical body right now? This physical body you have right now has lifetimes of data now. You're not the young little soul you used to be. You've gathered a lot of information since then, and you're standing here in one body. So what you can do is you can bring in this consciousness, give it a name. Let's say it's Crystal. You invite Crystal to join your Denise body. And at first it may be painful, it may be clumsy. Crystal's freaking out. She's freaking the heck out. She's like, what is going on? I can't believe you're in a relationship. Relationships aren't safe. Don't you remember what happened? And it's freaking out. It's up to you as the anchor point to say, hey, Crystal, I hear you. I know this is scary for you. I completely understand and get it. But the information you have is limited. Allow me, through my life experiences, to show you that this relationship is safe to us. You cure this aspect of yourself. You cure Crystal of the only things she knew to be true. You just expanded her consciousness through your lived experiences by a lot. So what happens is that lower aspect no longer exists. That timeline that your energy was feeding, sorry, I'm gonna move out of the sun a little bit. There you go. That aspect of yourself on the timeline is collapsed. So a page on the spindle disappears. And everyone that you affected negatively or even positively as a result of that experience is also gone. Which means something incredible happens. You get to find out what your next higher aspect is like. So if you're the anchor point and you collapse, you say, hey, it doesn't have to be that way anymore. We're done with that. And you integrate all those shadows and you reconcile them. You override the information. You say, it's not like that for us anymore, and I will show you. Then that anchor point becomes exposed to this. As this timeline collapses and the first time you ever felt pain and came to some fragmented conclusions, as that disappears from the time-space continuum, guess what happens? You get to very naturally embody the next best version of yourself, the version of you that you have always been had you never felt pain to begin with. That person exists on the time-space continuum. Imagine the kind of person you would be if you had never experienced trauma. That person exists and is available to you. So what happens is, after you collapse this timeline, you are free to embody this next higher aspect of yourself. Now, once you integrate that higher aspect of yourself, you're living your best life. Anything that is painful, you have the ability to cope with because you never experienced traumatic events. That's gone now. It's literally cured. It's out of the system. It's out of the universal timeline. So once you embody your higher aspects, the next natural step is that you become aware through embodiment of that vibration. You become aware that there's an even better version of you on the scale, your highest self. You're like, oh shit, I'm becoming aware that things are possible, but I don't know how to do them yet. I just know that they are because I'm existing at a higher vibrational level, that things I used to think were impossible as a result of what happened here are now in front of me. I'm living them, so they are possible. So that means that this other stuff that I'm imagining is also possible, but I don't know how to do that yet. I don't know how to be that person. So that means you have to go back on the timeline and take responsibility for all lower aspects. We took care of the lowest aspects, the most traumatic. But in order to embody your highest, you have to take responsibility and integrate all points of consciousness on the time space continuum that are still feeding into timelines and realities in which you are acting from fragmented information, from limited pools of data. Once you take responsibility for all points of where you are alive on the time space continuum relevant to Earth, then you do the same thing. You override that information by being who you are, by being this person. You say, I understand how you feel and why that mattered to you in that lifetime. I get why it's still, in a way, affecting us. But I have new data, I have new information, and I will show you through experience that what you know is not all there is. So once that truth is accepted by your lower aspects usually include trauma you experience in other worlds, not limited to Earth. So be very prepared to be introduced to galactic consciousness and other universes where you're alive, where you've experienced trauma. It's not the lowest because none of them are going to be as traumatic as your original fall to Earth, but they're still negatively affecting you. Once they are collapsed, that leaves the road from anchor point to your highest aspects becoming embodied very freaking clear. You're wide open to embody yourself at a deep, cohesive, comprehensive soul level. So now your soul, who you are, who you always were at a soul level. And soul level means from the most comprehensive data you had ever. So there's source energy. Let me go back to the other visual. There's source energy, which is all-knowing. And then there's the highest aspect of you, which got the closest to being all-knowing in physical form. So when you get to that space, you're embodying your highest self. You're embodying the closest thing to all-knowing that you have ever been. So at a soul level, you start operating in physical form from a lot of data. You know a lot at a soul level. You've collected data over eons and eons and eons across millions of worlds. So once you are embodying your soul level data and you are making decisions from that pool of data, which is a lot bigger than the one we currently have. Once you are acting in alignment and making decisions and experiencing life from the perspective of that data, then that leaves one option, baby. It leaves the road to ascended mastery. Ooh, where is it? Is that it? There we go. It leaves the road to ascended mastery wide open. Once you are in physical form, embodying your highest self, it has one place left to go in physical form, and that's ascended mastery, which is a person who embodies their soul at a very high level and retains or regains conscious memory of every instance ever lived and experienced, All moments in the time-space continuum are available to them from that point moving forward. So the next time you choose to visit in physical form a point in the time-space continuum, upon reaching self ascended mastery, you will be able to be born with all of your knowing, all of your data intact, no more amnesia. And you can choose to leave your body whenever you want to, because that there's no longer such a thing as being alive or not. It's just about data gathering. So, in conclusion, that is the transmission that I have for you guys today. I explained to you about what it is and a little bit about how it works. So I have to tell you now why it's important. This is important because right now, people are coming into spontaneous awareness of their concurrent lives without preparation. It's just happening. If you are a person who has been actively doing healing work, you've been doing shadow work, you've been maybe going to therapy even. If you have been doing some form of healing, this sun is really killing me. I know I'm doing a good job and I know you want to shower me in your light, but like it's really killing me. Thank you though. I love you. So if you've been doing any measure of healing work, you have been, maybe without even knowing, raising your vibratory level, which means as you raise your vibratory level, it allows you to experience things that only sensitive people can. You experience your intuition. You experience a shift in energy that no one else in the room feels except you. You experience spiritual guides and channeling, all that good stuff. Okay, that's a little better. I'm just gonna keep moving this way. So what happens and what is happening right now, which is why this information is so important to deliver right now, is because a lot of you that have been healing are now at a vibratory level which allows for spontaneous clashes, spontaneous points of contact between you and concurrent lives, other aspects of you that are also, I don't want to say trapped, but are also experiencing the matrix in a different way somewhere else. You guys, your version 1 of you and version 2 are spontaneously bumping heads. This is happening while daydreaming. This is happening in spontaneous visions throughout your day. This is happening in meditations. This is happening in dreams. I've had people already message me about becoming aware of lives that they have with husbands and kids, and they're older and they're freaking out and they want these memories. They're like, I want to know where they are. I want that for me. I'm not ignoring you, by the way. I just had to do this first. That's what's happening. And right now, people think that they're crazy, just like I did 2 years ago. People are freaking out. They think that they're bipolar. They think that they're disassociating. They think that they're schizophrenic because they're hearing voices inside of them that they're not 100% sure is them. All of this can be very psychologically damaging to a person. And currently, our mental healthcare system is not equipped to usher and facilitate a person through an awakening of this kind. Our mental and medical healthcare systems do not recognize, to a large extent, spirituality and the study of consciousness. We're still trapped in the matrix thinking that we're separate, thinking that our body is all that we are. Your body's not something that you are. Your body's something that you have. It's something that you use to help you navigate life, but it's not who or what you are. And until we as a society wrap our head around that, our systems are inequipped to take care of us at a holistic level. So that's what's happening. A lot of people are spontaneously becoming aware of concurrent lives and you don't know what to do. Some of you are experiencing such a deep longing for love or for a specific person and you have no clue while you're walking around, going to work, living your life. You have no clue where that feeling is coming from. You just know that it's overwhelming and it's starting to get in the way of your normal human life. Some of you are experiencing karmic patterns that are a result from the original point in the time-space continuum where you made a conclusion from a limited pool of data. So you're experiencing those karmic patterns in an amplified fashion because you're experiencing it as if you were still feeling it for the very first time when you were very innocent and had no clue what life was all about. It can be really hard. What's even harder is when you weave that initial lowest aspect of you, as at first it's a little dramatic, it's a little clumsy. You're very aware that there's two people, two forms of consciousness, connected but separate, or connected but different, occupying one body. At first, it's not a big deal. It's very easy for you to discern and say, okay, that's not my fear. That's version 2's fear. Let me soothe, let me self-talk, and let me resolve it a little bit. Let me support them. Once you stop being able to tell the difference and you fully merge into one consciousness in one body, that's when it gets hard. That's when it gets hard to observe the changes in your reality and not start actively participating in them, because those patterns feel familiar. Because every single point that you've ever visited on the time-space continuum in the form of a life is an echo of the original conclusions that you came to from the fragmented point of data. So let's say in your lowest aspect, your most painful life, you came to the conclusion that you are unlovable. Every other life you've ever had has that pattern. You came into those lives, you were born with that programming, that consciousness was already there, including the life that you have right now. So when at first you have two separate consciousness in one body, it's quite clear the degree of, let's say, unworthiness. Let's say version 2 is like mega unworthy, doesn't want anything good happening to her because she can't receive it. But then there's you, version A, that's still comes across feelings of unworthiness, but not to that degree anymore. Like, you're still gonna eat, you're still gonna shower. So at first it's very clear to differentiate, but once it becomes a more subtle of a difference and you start reacting to your triggers of unworthiness as if you were experiencing from them for the first time, it can be really hard to maintain your neutral ground. It can be really hard to say, this isn't me. It's really hard to step out of the pattern and say, whoa, that's not me. I'm not reacting that way. That's still that other life. It requires grit, okay? And this is coming from a place of experience. You have to be careful not to re-fall into the trap, because some of those conclusions can be very convincing, especially if they start playing out physically in your present life in a way that supports the original fragmented conclusion. If you start being treated by people like you are unworthy and you get triggered and you're experiencing that feeling of unworthiness, it becomes very easy to believe that first conclusion that you came to about life that was fragmented. So you have to fight extra hard to observe all the ways that you are treated as if you're worthy, all of the ways that you are important. You have to take responsibility for something you weren't even aware of happened eons ago. And you have to be the one to say, I will lift this feeling from me. I will go out of my way. I will show myself how important I am, how worthy I am. And by living an experience of being worthy, you directly override the conclusions you came to in that lowest aspect, which means that timeline collapses as if it never happened at all. And that's what leaves you free to embody the version of yourself on the time-space continuum that exists that never felt trauma, that never felt pain, not to that kind of traumatic degree. So think of the person you could embody if your trauma were just lifted. It's a really intense process. And this was a bit of a summary on my end. I know it got really long, but it's even more detail oriented on my blog. So please watch this and read the blog. Please share both of them. I really want this information to get to whoever thinks that they're crazy right now because they're experiencing these things. As of now, I am not yet offering this as a service, but I will. I am going through Timeline Boot Camp by the Akashic Records so that I can select a few people. I'm only doing 5. Please don't reach out to me. I promise you, you will know when I have those 5 spots open, because it only really takes 1 or 2 people going through this to collapse entire dimensional realities. The people that they knew, everyone becomes free from 1 person going through this service. It's a really big deal, but it requires facilitation. It's not a one-time service. I can't leave you alone to handle this, especially if you lack training in the spiritual technology. So when I do come out with this as a service, it will be available to 5 people at a time, and be prepared to enter into a professional mentorship with me for at least a period of 3 months. It's a really intense process, and my job is to make sure that you don't fall into your own matrix, the matrix that you create for yourself. It's my job to make sure that you have the toolkit and the data necessary for you to live your best life in that integration, even after our 3 months together. It's a very sophisticated technology. I can and will perform the service, but it takes a minute to get there, okay? So I will be releasing more details about this service as they become available, meaning as I finish my training and gather data. I went through it 2 years ago. I very recently went through it again a month ago, so I'm still gathering data. I performed the service on an amazing friend of mine who I'm also gathering data from. So it's a bit of a process. When the service does come out, it will be available on my website and all of my social media, and I'm only taking 5 clients at a time. Those five clients pretty much have to consent to that data being published at some point, because in order to change our understanding of the human experience and integrate a more multidimensional perspective of it, especially allowing that, especially in a way that multidimensionality is recognized in our mental health care systems and our medical health care systems, I suspect that this data is eventually going to have to be published so that we can prove, so that as a group, as a collective, we can prove that points of energy that belong to us on the time-space continuum continue like an echo. It continues to make a sound through all of the dimensions. It never leaves until it can occupy one concentrated apex point, and that apex point overriding the previous information. Anyway, I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you so much. Please share this content with whoever you think will be interested, or if somebody may or may not be experiencing this, please share it with them, because I want them to know that they are not crazy. They are experiencing something that's very real and something that's going to completely change humanity's perception of being forever. It's literally going to change our understanding of life as we know it. Because now we can't run away from how connected we all are. We can't run away from our past lives. We have to take accountability for them. It's the only way to reach self mastery. Okay. And the important thing is, it takes by one person reconciling one timeline, you heal every person you ever engaged with in that experience, in that dimensional reality. Think of how I am 25 years old. Think of how many people I've met and engaged with at this point. At time of recording, I have 12,000 followers on Twitter. So by me collapsing one of my lowest aspects, once that process is done and I embody my next higher aspects, I am going to heal every person I ever engaged with in that lifetime. I also set them free, which means that all of humanity living on Earth right now is going to experience, boom, a mega shift in a matter of months instead of lifetimes. It used to take us lifetimes to do this. It no longer does, because this technology that is ancient and belonged to our ancestors. The mystery schools of Egypt knew it, the Mayans knew it, the Aztecs suspected it. I don't think they practiced it, but they knew of it. The Sumerians, these ancient civilizations had this technology, and it was perfected and it was trained. We are getting back to that point in human civilization. So it's going to require that we get really intimate with the belief that everything is connected. We are connected to each other, and we are responsible for one another. We really, really are. So let's see what happens, right? Okay, I'm going to leave it on that note. Thank you so much for sticking with me on this. I hope it wasn't too overwhelming. I'm going to drop a link to my website, as well as the link to the full blog post with additional visuals in case any part of this got confusing. For a more comprehensive understanding, I would read the blog and watch the video. Okay, thank you so much. Again, if any of you feel called to study with me, please reach out to me. Oh, look at me in my duality. It's Gemini season. Thank you. King of lighting, honestly, the sun. I really like it. It's a powerful visual to end on. Anyway, yes, integration. If you have any questions, please comment. I will do my best to answer. If any of you are called to work with me, to study under me, to access the Akashic Records for yourself, there will also be information about that in the description below. Thank you again, and you're not crazy. You're doing the best that you can with what you have, and I honor that space. I honor your duality. I honor your polarity, your yin and your yang. Okay, thank you so much. Bye.